Shalom, welcome to the 70 Facebooks of the Torah. I'm Jesse Olitsky, rabbinic intern at the Orangetown Jewish Center. This week's Torah portion, Parshat Yitro, is full of a ton of things to discuss together, especially the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments that we receive in this week's Parsha. There's a moment at the very beginning of the Parsha, though, that I hope we can discuss and that we'll learn together when Moses encounters his father-in-law, Yitro, Jethro, the high priest of Midian. The text tells us at the very beginning of chapter 18 of Exodus that Jethro, together with Zipporah, Moses' wife, and his two sons, go to meet Moses as Moshe and the Israelites, Bnei Israel, had crossed the sea into freedom, into safety. The text tells us that they embraced and they kissed, and then Moses heads with Yitro into the tent to recount for him what happened. In chapter 18 of the book of Exodus, verses 8 and 9, we learn, Moses then recounted to his father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Lord had shown Israel when he delivered them from the Egyptians. It tells us further, how does Jethro rejoice? In verse 10 we learn, "Blessed be Adonai," Jethro said, "who had delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians." Moses simply recounts for Yitro the majesty of God, the power of God, and all the miracles that God does in Egypt. And what does Jethro say? Jethro says, Baruch Adonai, blessed is God. Now, it's amazing that this story, that this narrative is juxtaposed to what happens in last week's Parsha, right after the Israelites cross the sea, right after the Israelites are free, they complain. There's no water to drink. There's no food to eat. And they say, why? Why did you bring us out here in the desert to die? They're the ones that experienced the plagues firsthand. They're the ones that crossed the sea, that saw literally the water turn into walls on their right and onto their left, as the text tells us. And they complained. They didn't appreciate all that God had to offer them. But Jethro wasn't there. Jethro didn't experience these miracles firsthand, and yet still, Jethro praised God just by hearing. The first two words of the Parsha explain it all. Vayishma Yitro. All it took for Jethro was to hear of all the wonders and miracles that God did for the Israelites, and he was moved to praise God. But the Israelites, they were taken out of slavery. They crossed the split sea of reeds, the Yam Suf. All they could do was complain about the lack of food and drink. The goal for each of us should be to be more like Yitro, to hear of God's power, and to be immediately moved to honor God. We should not need such convincing. That is what faith is all about. Faith is about when you don't need to be so convinced. Faith is when you do not need the thunder and the lightning and the fire. You hear and you just know. Jethro heard what God did for Moses and the Israelites. And Jethro knew. And Jethro rejoiced. Is it that so many of us in our lives wait for those first-hand experiences, wait for those miracles to happen to us, and we can't simply hear of God's power, hear of God's greatness, hear of the blessings in our lives, and praise God, Baruch Adonai, as Jethro does in this Parsha. How can we strive to be more like Jethro, and why do we simply wait to see those miracles firsthand like Bnei Israel does? I look forward to discussing this with you, with learning with you throughout the week. and finding ways that we can appreciate the miracles that we hear of and not just wait for those miracles to happen to us.